Um, Mr. Winkler, I think it was Robert De Niro that was obsessed with Jack LaMotta's book and the autobiography that he was reading while you were shooting New York, New York, correct? He's the one started the project.
Yeah, when we were doing New York, New York, Bob carried a copy of Jake LaMotta's, the book about Jake LaMotta around with him constantly, and approached me at one point and said, I'm very, very interested in doing a movie about Jake LaMotta. And as a matter of fact, he would point to Scorsese because he was directing New York, New York at the time, and say, and he's the guy I want to direct me.
But Mr. Scorsese was not Martin Scorsese was not keen on making a film about boxing, correct?
No, what happened ultimately, Marty felt that it wasn't, and he saw the film not as a boxing film, but as a really deep look into a man's life. And that's how he perceived it. And basically, that was in back of his mind all the time. And as I might say, De Niro as well. I don't think Bob had ever intended to do a boxing movie. And frankly, I had done Rocky right before that, which I also thought of as a personality film and as a love story.
How did you? I mean, this film is incredibly unconventional. How did you convince the studio to finance it?
Well, actually, we had, as you probably know, we had a very, very big success with Rocky. It won an Academy Award and was financially, at the time, probably the most successful film based on what it cost to what it grossed. And they were desperate to do Rocky 2. And we owned the rights to all the Rockies. And I said I wouldn't do Rocky 2 unless they agreed to do Raging Bull. And that was the give and take that we had.
And how did you? I mean, did you expect that Martin Scorsese would choose black and white for the film, and how hard or easy was to get that pass?
Well, what happened was it was easy in as much as the studio was very, very concerned with another film that they had a big commitment for. So they really didn't pay much attention to what we did. It was Mike Cimino's Heaven's Gate that really took all their attention at the time. So we kind of went off and nobody knew what we were doing. I never asked anybody or told anybody. I never said, hey, by the way, we're going to do it in black and white. We just did it. And don't forget, Woody had a big hit at the time with Annie Hall.
Manhattan
in black and white. And Bogdanovich had a Paper Moon about that same time in black and white.
Can you tell us a little bit about the rest of the casting process? I think Katie Moriarty was not an actress.
No, as a matter of fact, she was a greeter at an Italian restaurant in the Bronx, New York. But she knew Joe Pesci from somehow that he had gone to that restaurant. And then we were looking around and casting. We wanted unknowns. So Joe suggested that we meet her. And we did. We liked her. And we then did a screen test. And we never saw the screen test. Because when we finished the screen test, we looked at each other and said, she's perfect. And literally, I've never seen the screen test. We hired her without even looking at the screen test.
Just before before the screening started, I was telling the audience that sound and the photography in this film were revolutionary. The way. Can you talk a little bit about the use of sound in particular?
Well, Marty was intent on having, as you can tell, and some of you can't even tell, music cues on music cues. And we spent, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 times the amount you normally spend on the mixing of the sound. We were at the old Goldwyn Studios in Hollywood, and Marty didn't go home. We actually took a camper and backed it into the back or door of the soundstage. So we would finish work, and he would just go and sleep, and then come back in the morning and never leave the Goldwyn Studios. And as an example of how thorough he wanted to be, we were very, very late in finishing the film, and we had to open in New York. We opened at, I think it was the Sutton Theater over on 57th Street, east of Lexington Avenue. I don't know if the Sutton Theater is there anymore. I doubt it.
It's not.
But we were scheduled. It's not there anymore.
No.
I'm sure. Anyhow, we were opening at the Sutton Theater in New York. We were opening at a theater in Los Angeles, and we were opening in a theater in Toronto. So we had on Friday. This was Sunday night, and I said to Marty, "I've got the labs staying open, but at midnight we have to finish our mix, and the film's got to go to the lab, and we've got to get a print to New York, and a print to."
Oops.
Thursday, and we have to get a print on Wednesday to Toronto because they had a censor that had to approve the film before it could be played. As a matter of fact, my son Charles was going to hand carry it from Los Angeles to or fly on. He was going to hand carry it to be on a plane to Toronto to get it approved by the censor on Thursday, so we could run there Friday. Anyhow, so at about, I don't know, a half hour, about 11:30 that night, I said to Marty, I said, at midnight, we're finished. We're going to pull the plug. Of course, the film has got to go right to the lab. There's a car waiting outside the soundstage, and they're going to take it right to the lab. And he said, well, there's the scene at the Copacabana. A guy walks up. Actually, it was the guy, the actor, was not an actor. He was a man by the name of Pete Savage, who wrote the book that we used. And Marty said, when Pete Savage goes to the bar, he orders a Cuddy Sock, which is a whiskey, obviously. And I can't hear the word Cuddy Sock. It's not clear to me. So I said, look, we've been at this now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. We've been working 16 hours a day. Nobody could hear anything at this point. We're all deaf. But I will tell you, in a half hour, Cuddy Sock or not, it's going to the lab. Well, he got all upset. He said, well, in that case, it's no longer a Marty Scorsese film. I said, Raging Bull is not going to be a Marty Scorsese film because you can't hear the word Cuddy Sock. He said, yes. And he walked out of the stage, and that was it. And we made it in time and all that. And at about 20 years later, there was some film festival that gave me an award. And Marty, it was Chicago. And Marty came out from New York to give me the award. And as part of the award ceremony, they ran a whole bunch of film clips of movies that I had made. And they ran that particular one of the clips they ran from Raging Bull was that Cuddy Sock. And Marty turned to me, he said, I can hear it now. So, but the strange thing was, and as I said, we spent a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of creativity and a lot of effort to get the sound right on Raging Bull. And we thought we had it perfect. So when it did open in New York at the Sutton Theater, Marty and I were standing in the back at noon, which was the first show on Friday, and the sound was terrible. So we ran over to the manager and said, what happened? The sound is awful. He said, the sound is awful. I just spent $59.95 on 4 speakers at Radio Shack for your movie. And that was his response. Of course, now that wouldn't happen. Now, that was a long time ago. Now the theaters are really well equipped sound-wise, and I don't want to go back to that era of the 70s when the theaters were really looking to save whatever money they can, and they never invested what they should have. But when the multiplexes came along, the sound obviously became much better in all the venues.
We have a great sound system. So yeah, really great.
Everything in Sag Harbor is great. It's one of my favorite places.
Raise your hand, if you have a question. I can keep going. Here, yeah. Hold on for the mic.
So after all these years, what's one question that you haven't been asked about the production of this film that you really wish someone would?
Why we didn't win the Academy Award?
Why didn't you win?
I'm asked. I don't have the answer. I'm asking the question. I think the gentleman wanted to know what question I would ask. I don't have the answer to it. I could never figure that out. But you know what? It's not the first time. When Rocky won the Academy Award, the other nominated pictures were great. Taxi Driver was a nominated picture. All the President's Men, Network. I mean, and we won, and I'm sure everybody said, was it better than All the President's Men? Was it better than Taxi Driver? Was it better than Network? I mean, those are pretty good movies. Look, Goodfellas also lost the Academy Award. A picture I made called The Right Stuff, which I think is arguably a great, great movie. We lost to some tearjerker. But anyhow, I don't even remember the name. So it happens. You can't, it's an honest race, and sometimes you win the race and sometimes you don't.
There's a question there.
Do you know or who trained Robert De Niro to box as he did in this film?
Well, there were Jake himself was very, very involved in training Bob. Jake was really the principal trainer of De Niro.
And is it true that you consider at some point when it was to gain weight to use a fat suit, and De Niro said no, I need to put the weight on?
Yeah, I was. We were friends because we had done movies, even 2 movies before Raging Bull together, and I was afraid that losing weight to do the early scenes when he's a young boxer, and then suddenly gaining all the weight might be hazardous to his health. Although I'm not a doctor, but it didn't make sense to me. And we've known each other now 50 years. And it's the only time we really had a fight. And I said, we'll get you a fat suit, we'll get you everything. And he said, no, I won't be able to talk the same way. I won't be able to walk the same way. I won't be able to think the same way. So we did all the early stuff, and we were literally shut down for, I don't know, 3 months. And then one day, and I hadn't had much contact with Bob or Marty during that period. I was doing, I think I forgot whether I was doing something else, preparing another movie. And one day my office, which was in Culver City, the door opened to my office and a head poked in, and I didn't recognize him. I got a big grin, and it was De Niro, weighing 40, 50 pounds more than the last time I saw him. And I literally didn't recognize him at first. He changed that much. And he was right. It was a great transformation. As a matter of fact, I will tell you something now that probably you don't know. Well, you wouldn't know. I just finished doing a movie with Bob De Niro about the famous New York gangster Frank Costello and the famous New York gangster Vito Genovese. And Bob is playing both parts.
Oh, wow.
Both parts. And it's phenomenal. The great American actor, I don't think has ever seen anything like this. He's brilliant in it.
There's a question here.
Hi, Mr. Winkler, did you oversee the restoration? Were you involved in that?
No, I wasn't. No.
And where was it done? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you.
There.
I know you mentioned that Marty Scorsese wasn't intentionally going to make a real boxing film. That wasn't his focus, the story he wanted to tell. But obviously, the fighting scenes are so brilliant, and we all know that Marty Scorsese is such a fan of older film. Do you know of anything in particular that might have inspired him, that he might have watched previous, that to come up with those amazing fight scenes?
I think some of it was The Champion, which the Kirk Douglas movie, which we were all very impressed with. But the great thing about Marty is he's an original. He came up with shots and ideas that I don't think anybody ever had done before. He gets inspiration from old films, but it's all him. It's all him.
April?
I hope I can express this clearly, but there seems to be, and this film is so realistic. I was wincing and cowering through the whole thing as I had the first time.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I'm sorry. This film is so realistic. It's profoundly realistic, and it's incredibly visceral. And yet there's an extraordinary amount of abstraction in the way that a lot of the scenes are framed. I'm thinking of just the side of his arm.
Could you help me? I couldn't hear everything.
Yeah, if you finish the question, April, I'll then
Okay,
I'll.
I'm just thinking
yeah.
about the scene where he's in the prison cell and you can only see part of his arm. And then you mentioning the sound.
Yeah,
In the first fight, there's a woman that screams and her scream keeps going and going and going. And I thought, this is not a person. Or you prompted me to have that imaginary take on it. So I just was wondering if we could talk
Yeah.
about that.
So the question is, she said that the film has a realistic impact because it's extremely visceral and you perceive it as reality, and yet formally there are shots that are almost abstract, and she's mentioning in particular in jail, the details on the arm, and the way that some of the fights are shot, and obviously the use of sound, because the sound that we hear during the fights is sometimes sounds that has nothing to do with what's going on, and she's asking if you can comment on these choices.
Well, it's interesting because we had a sound mixer, a sound editor who made sounds for us. His name was Frank Vaughan, and he was an old timer. And he